were surprised at how slow Minocqua was developing. Other railroad towns developed and sawmill towns developed much faster in a boomtown way. Minocqua did not. So, like I said, within a year, they moved their building a block north, where you saw those pictures. And then William Fisher, a shoemaker, bought this lot from the Townsite Company. Didn't buy it from Schillings. Schillings had just a purchase contract for this lot. It hadn't been deeded to them yet. They made a deal with the Townsite Company. Look, we'll exchange our lot here for this one up here. They probably had to pay a little more, move their building up. The Townsite Company then still owned this lot, and they sold it to William Fisher. In 1892, he built his. He didn't own it yet in 92. 1892, he built this building. First floor was a shoe shop. Second floor was. And his grandson is sitting in the audience. John Fisher. Let's see. Next.
Two old buildings, did they have foundations underneath them?
Yes. Yes. Now they didn't initially, but you know. This is an early John Schilling of the Schilling brothers, who owned a store directly across the street from this. Started the Minocqua, the Bank of Minocqua, and this was the building that the Bank of Minocqua was in. It's right next door to the Minocqua House. So this is the south edge of the Minocqua House. This is the Bank of Minocqua building. You know, when I was doing my initial research and reading the newspapers, because there's just a ton of information in those early Minocqua times, there were tons of references to the Bank of Minocqua. There were ads run nearly every week about the Bank of Minocqua. Never did they say where it was located. And I didn't know where the Bank of Minocqua was located until in 1891, the bank was established. Finally, in 1909, when there was a bank robbery in October of 09, the bank robbery involved a dynamite explosion. And things from this bank blew all the way across the street through the windows of the building across the street. And that was described in the paper. So then finally, because I knew what building the pieces went through, so then I finally knew where the bank was because of the explosion. This is a really nice photo of Front Street starting from the Lakeside House looking east. Here's the Minocqua. It's this entire block that burned in the fire and then turned to the south. And like, as we mentioned, that's next month's topic. And there are quite a few pictures of it. This photo was taken in 1907, so it's outside of the time period that I'm intending to cover. But 1890s like this, they don't exist. In this photo, there are 6 hotels along Front Street. One of them is the Lakeside House down on the western end of West Front Street. The other 5 hotels are east of Oneida Street, starting with Minocqua House and going east. So there were 6 hotels. This is a photo I've always found interesting. I found it years into my research, many years into my research, long after I published my book. This photo is taken from the east end of Front Street. And what it's interesting, it shows that where Front Street ends here. So this is the Briggs house, which is on the corner of Chippewa. Front Street extended only to this point and then headed north. This is the Woodruff Road. That's what it was called, Woodruff Road. So if you were going farther than Woodruff, you probably took the train. But this is the Woodruff Carriage Road. Beyond this to the east was swamp. It was lowland. And so Front Street wasn't developed into that all the way to Menominee, to the corner right up here with Menominee, until almost 1920. they had to fill that lowland to extend the street and make that corner. So in this picture, we've got the 5 hotels. We've got the Briggs House, the St. Paul House, the European House, the Union House, and the Minocqua House. Five hotels that are on that street. Things had cleaned up from the very first years when the Body House was on this block. I mentioned that most of the building was in that first block south of Front Street. There wasn't much going on south of Milwaukee Avenue. This photo was taken on Milwaukee Avenue looking east. I just love, this is just such a great photo, taken in 1899. I can date it as being 1899 or 19. And this is Pat Madden, the owner of the Lakeside House. He was a real horseman. Back in those late 1890s, they did a lot of horse racing, and this was one of his prize horses for horse racing. And he had, behind the Lakeside House, there was a stable fronting on Milwaukee Avenue. That's why you can see this. I don't know if this is feed or manure, but this is where his stable was. The door into it would have been, right here off the picture. And that's why he's here with his horse. So this is, but you can see on this side, if you go on the south side of Milwaukee Avenue, things are pretty vacant. Here's the Darwin General Store, right here. And there's that McGonigal and Doyle and McGonigal livery stable. And then farther down here, you see this white building. That was the first office for the Minocqua Times. This photo also was taken in 1899. You can date this one very closely as 1899 or 1900. And this too shows how relatively empty the south end of the island is. So the action was up along Front Street. You've got some residences down here. Got the predecessor to the Sackies. This was David Josart's son, boat livery. And the house right here is the David Josart residence. This tall building here is the John Sutton residence. Until the Heritage House, until the Catholic priest built his home, this John Sutton's was the largest one in town. Two things I want to comment about Minocqua's early history. So I mentioned that when the railroad was built to Minocqua, and they ended it on the island because they had expected that there'd be a sawmill built here and this would be a boom town. For whatever reason, nobody ever built that sawmill. But the lack of the sawmill, although it resulted in the town developing more slowly, caused it to develop as a commercial center. So it had a lot of general stores. It had 4 general stores. It had a bank. No other town in this area had a bank other than, well, if you went to Eagle River or Rhinelander there was, but towns like Hazelhurst, Star Lake, Arbor, Minocqua had a bank. And so it developed, or it became a commercial center. And that worked to its long-term advantage because when other towns like Hazelhurst, between 1906 and 1915, the sawmills in this area started closing down. And when they did, the town that sawmill was in collapsed. It just went from bustling community to practically nothing. And that didn't happen with Minocqua. So Minocqua just continued growing and didn't have a collapse when a sawmill closed. And the other thing that I wanted to clarify is too the impact of tourism. It has frequently over the years I've seen depictions of Minocqua history talk along the line that Minocqua was this logging town. We had lumberjacks here. It lived on logging, and then when the logging died and the logging faded out, everybody looked around and wondered, well, what are we going to do now? Well, let's try tourism. That's not the way it happened. Minocqua was recognized as a tourist community and a tourist center right from the start. In fact, even before it started, it was recognized being a tourist community. Here, and then this is December 7, 1887, from Northern Wisconsin News, published in Merrill. And this is worth reading. It's quite interesting. The Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railway Company will plat a rival to Tomahawk at Tomahawk Lake. And see, that's what I said, that we were known as Tomahawk Lake to begin with. At Tomahawk Lake next season. The railroad to that place is now nearly completed, and an engine house is to be built there at once. At present, there is nothing but a half dozen saloons, one general store, and one residence at the place. The Milwaukee Lakeshore and Western extension from Rhinelander to Early will pass within 2 miles of the place. Judging from the fact that the town will be beautifully situated and right in the center of the best hunting and fishing districts of North Wisconsin. It is predicted that the lots will sell readily, that in a short time the place will be noted far and wide, both as a summer resort and as a resort for hunters and fishers. The surveyor of the St. Paul Company is now on the site laying out lots. The town is to be called Minocqua. Another example of that recognition, I should say, that Minocqua destination appeared in the Rhinelander Vindicator on January 28, 1891. Now, Minocqua already existed by that time, but and I'm not going to quote their article, but the title of their article was "The Queen of Summer Resorts." Well, that's in 1891. Well, logging was going full bore up here, and was going to be for another 15 years, another 20 to 25 years, actually. So long before logging died out, we were basing our economy on tourism here. I have one extra that has nothing to do with what my topic has been, but I find it rather interesting. Does anybody know what Minocqua's connection to the Wild Bill Hickok shooting is? We have a very direct connection. Now, Wild Bill Hickok was shot in Deadwood, South Dakota in 1876. That was just 11 years before the railroad was built into Minocqua, 11 plus. Because the shooting happened in August of 1876, and the railroad got here in December of 1887. But it really was recent history. I mean, you can think back 11 years ago, and it seems pretty recent. So that was recent history. Well, John Mann, come back to John Mann. John Mann was in Deadwood at the time of the shooting. In later years, he told Cap Ray that he had been in Deadwood when Wild Bill Hickok was shot. And I'm sorry, in later years, Cap Ray told the story that John Mann was in Deadwood at the time Wild Bill Hickok was shot. Cap Ray started writing reminiscences of the early years of Minocqua in the 1940s. And that was one of the things he said, that John Mann was there. And in fact, he said John Mann was sitting at the table playing cards with Wild Bill Hickok when he was shot. Now, that was not the case. The confusion, though, probably arises from the fact that the owner of the saloon Wild Bill Hickok was shot, the partner in the owner, was named Mann. I suspect he was a relative, like even the brother of John Mann. This happened a lot, tons of times in Minocqua and Woodruff in early history. Family members moved to the town together. And so John Mann and his brother may have decided to go to Deadwood together, but his brother was a half owner of the saloon where Wild Bill Hickok was shot, and was in fact sitting at the table playing cards with Wild Bill when he was shot. So that's where the confusion could easily arise. Valid, but John Mann was not in the saloon at the time of the. He was very closely related, though, to the shooting. Now, we've been to Deadwood lots of times, and I looked into this there. And here's the newspaper from Deadwood on August 5, 1876, the Black Hills Pioneer. where the article about the assassination of Wild Bill appears. And if any of you saw the miniseries, I think it was an HBO miniseries about 15 years ago about Deadwood, which was really a good series. And it depicted early in the series, in the first season, the shooting of Wild Bill Hickok. Very interesting, and you'd have, if you saw that, you'd have a feeling for this event. The shooter was caught and was tried immediately by a jury in Deadwood. And as it turns out, John Mann was one of the jurors. Here's a list of the jurors for the for the trial of Wild Bill Hickok. John Mann was a juror. That's what his connection was. Now, it's possible that either of two things may have happened. The jury, which found Jack McCall innocent, as a justified killing, Jack McCall told the story that he was shooting Wild Bill because Wild Bill killed his brother. Well, it turned out Jack McCall didn't even have a brother that got killed, but the story floated for the trial and he got let off. But because he didn't get let off entirely, because as it turned out, Deadwood was not a government-sanctioned territory, and so this trial of Jack McCall at that time turned out to be outside the law, illegal, and he was captured and tried in Yankton, South Dakota, later. I think about 2 or 3 months later, he found guilty. But anyway, this jury that let him, the sentiment of the town was way against McCall, and they thought it was terrible that he was found innocent and let free. And so the jurors were not popular people, and John Mann was on that jury, and on a jury, a criminal case, if everybody doesn't agree that the defendant is guilty, they get let off. So it's not necessarily true that all these people thought he should be found innocent or found not guilty. But one or more of them did, and that let him off. So anyway, John Mann, he may not have wanted to be associated with that jury, so he may have told the story to Cap Ray that he was in the saloon playing cards, he was inflating his position, or else he told Cap Ray really what his position was, and 50 years later when Cap Ray wrote about it, he forgot what John Mann's exact connection was, and in his head it seemed that John Mann must have been playing cards with Wild Bill Hickok. So that's our connection. John Mann was actually there. He was on the jury that found Jack McCall not guilty. The trial that took place like 2 days after the shooting. The newspaper reflects what the feelings were about it. The newspaper wrote, "Should it ever be our misfortune to kill a man, which we pray God it may not, we would simply ask that our trial might take place in some of the mining camps of these hills." Well, that's it. That's the beginning of the. Part of it out went pretty long. Any questions?
The buildings we can move?
Well, the Indian village that was located across the lake in the early surveys was called Minocqua. So that's probably where the name came. There are other stories of where it derived. That's the one that makes the most sense to me. It's on the original maps of the Indian village. I don't think so. I mean, the name Minocqua was chosen already in December of 1887 when the surveyors were surveying the island to create the plat. plat the lots, the name was already known to be Minocqua. Because there's some confusion here, and again, I think it's caused by Cap Ray. Cap Ray, in later years, told a story about meeting with some guys to decide what the name of the town should be. But he was depicting it as being in the spring. I mean, the town was ready to be sold. The lots were ready to be sold, and he depicted that they were trying to decide what the name of the town should be. Well, as indicated by that December 1887 article from Merrill about Minocqua being a tourist town and the lots are being surveyed, they already knew back then that it was going to be called Minocqua. So some of the stories that exist about how that name was chosen just don't make sense to me. This is the one that makes the most sense to me.
Surveyors came through. You said it was already called Minocqua then?
No,
No, it was not.
it's called Tomahawk Lakes. I mean, it was just the chain of lakes was called Tomahawk Lakes.
So why do you suppose the train took that hard 90-degree and they built that huge trestle to come here? Why didn't they set it up like on Dr. Vinny?
It's a good question. I don't have an answer to that, except that they thought this was a strategic, this island, so to speak, was a strategic place on the chain.
Because the Tomahawk River exited off one side, which would be better set up for mills.
Well, they didn't need a river for the sawmill because the plan, once the railroad was built here, I mean, up until the railroad was built here, any logs coming out of the Tomahawk Lakes area were being floated down the Tomahawk River. But one of the main purposes of building a railroad up here was to transport logs to the south, so they didn't have to be driven on river drives, which were so undependable. They could be taken year-round instead of just in the spring. So the existence of the Tomahawk River, it was the fact that they were going to be able to dump logs into this chain of lakes and float them to a sawmill on the chain, and they thought this island here was a strategic location for that. Yes.
Picnic Island, it used to be called American Island now. Did it ever cross there?
Across the lake? No. That's an awful large body of water for any, and there are instances where a logging railroad would cross ice temporarily over a winter period, but boy, I don't think they would do it across the lake like that. Maybe a logging railroad, but that's a big body of water to run a logging railroad over. I don't know the colloquial name of that island. I've heard both. Yes.
What were these lots selling for back early on?
The commercial lots were $150 to $350. Residential, $100. You're eager to get out. I didn't run long. Hey,
Okay, thank you.
thanks for coming. Yes.